Right, so you join me here today for a bit of springtime carp fishing, commercial fishing on the pole. Starting to warm up, fishing starting to get good, and you join me at a pretty special place. I've never been here before, heard a little bit about it, but the first thing that struck me is how beautiful this place is. This is Furnace Mill Fishery near Kidderminster, and hopefully it's going to be the scene of a few fish caught today. So we're going to run you through how to catch, or simple methods how to catch, firstly on a new commercial fishery that you've never been to before, and just simple tactics how to catch carp, F1s, or at least I hope that's what's in here. I'm going to run you through the rigs and the sort of tackle I use, how I approach it, and hopefully we'll catch a few fish along the way. Okay, so we just started the session and I've started how I would typically start on probably 80% of commercials across the country, and that's fishing pellets short. There's one. Skimmer that one, I think. So we've got fishery pellets today, some nice blue coloured pellets, and I've just started off by simply cab potting sort of half a dozen 4mm to begin with. Caught a skimmer like that. Had a crucian and a little carp so far, so decent start. No bigger fish yet. Sure there's a few in here, but this line on most commercials is sort of the go-to starting point for me, if you like. I'm just sprinkling a few 4mm in my pot, shipping out. I've got a hard pellet on the hook, just a 6mm, just so it stands out a bit more. Obviously we're in springtime at the minute, so my go-to on most commercials would be just hard pellets, and we're just seeing how it's working at the minute. So obviously quite a few small fish in this sort of commercials. See a lot of smaller fish on the surface. Obviously there's little carp, crucians. I've had some skimmers so far, so I'm trying to get to the better fish by fishing hard pellets. And there's one straight away. That one feels like a better fish. Yeah, it's just hanging deep there. So I've sort of stuck with it a little bit. I've had a few small fish straight away, kept sort of feeding, regularly dropping a bit of bait through. Obviously it can take a little while for the fish to find you, so it's worth sticking with it. And obviously when I'm starting short, if this was a match, I could look around and see what other people were doing, and rather than feed all my swims at once and potentially ruin them or feed it with the wrong baits, because obviously it's a new fishery, I don't know what to expect. Just by starting short, you can sort of take your time a little bit before you end up feeding your other lines. So bait selection, I've obviously kept it really simple with fishery pellets. I've got a bit of corn with me, there's a bit of a change bait, a bigger bait if there's a few nuisance fish about. I've also got some worms with me, again just a big hook bait. Sometimes fisheries like this can be quite silty as well, they can fizz a lot, so fishing a bigger bait might be worth trying now and again, but we'll come to that in a minute once we try our other lines. And this one feels like a decent carp, to be fair. I don't really know what's in this fishery, but the fish I've caught so far have been quite pretty. Crucians, little baby carp. This one feels a bit bigger. So I'll come to the rigs and tackle a bit later. Obviously I'm using an 11 hollow at the minute, which is sort of my go-to for commercials when you don't know what to expect.
I've just interrupted your blooming video, haven't I, folks? I do apologise. You were watching Des Shipp, weren't you, catching loads of fish and Andy Power and all that. But Very important message. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification button, and then that'll remind you to watch our fantastic videos.
I mean, it's ideal for a sort of all middle of the range fish, but if I do hook something a bit bigger, I'm quite happy playing fish on this. I've caught fish to over £20 on this elastic, but this one looks like a big F1 actually. Might be a carp. Oh, there's a mirror carp. Here we go. Nice leathery mirror carp. It's a nice fish to start. See if they'll let me hold him up. So there we go, nice looking fish. Immaculate in fact. So hopefully we'll get a few more of these. Let's put them back. Fit healthy fish, shot off. So like I said, I've got a 6mm pellet on the hook. Just banding it on a hair. And then all I've been doing, putting sort of probably about 10 4mm pellets in a pot. You can see the green pellets by my hand, but not to worry. All I'm doing is shipping that out. I'm actually dropping them from a height to make a bit of a noise, to help draw a few fish that are in the area. I'm just slowly lowering it down so that my hook bait's in amongst all them loose offerings. And hopefully we catch a few more carp like that one. So I don't know if you see there, I've got two back shot. So now and again there's a bit of wind sort of left to right blowing. By keeping that back shot there just off the water, ensures that the rig stays in place, keeps a tight line and doesn't blow around all over the place. I'm just being patient to begin with. If I'm not getting any bites, then I'll loose feed a few pellets over the top just to make a bit of noise. Little dink there, I think it's a little fish, silverfish maybe. Obviously a lot of this is sort of trial and error really, it's a new fishery. If you do start catching a lot of nuisance fish, then you can try bigger pellets. Bigger pellets, bigger baits, just make it more difficult for them. Aeroplane going over at the minute. That was a tiny little dink, I think that was a skimmer. It might be that I've fed too much bait and might get quicker bites if we sort of wean back the feed a little bit. So I'm fishing about 5 metres out, nice comfortable distance, I can throw that distance quite nicely. But it's far enough away that I'm not going to spook the fish. That one feels like a better one as well. I think what I'm going to do is feed over the top, just keep a few fish in the area. And it looks like it's quite a decent way to start the session. Crucian that one, nice fish. Nice golden buttery fish. Love catching crucians. So I think today's session I'm going to catch what I can short, close in, and if I do start to struggle I'll look to fish other lines, maybe fish a long line. So we're catching on hard pellets at the minute, so I don't see any reason why we won't catch out long. Just catapulting a few pellets, making a bit of noise. I've also got a shallow rig set up just in case they do come up in the water. That's the thing with springtime. We are still getting cold nights. Let's bite there straight away. So the water is still relatively cool, but it's warming up. So during the daytime, the sort of surface layer of the water does warm up quick. And you do find that this time of year in the springtime, the fish they're quite willing to come up in the water and feed up shallow. You'll see them cruising around on sunny days. It's just where the fish want to be, so it makes sense to target them up in the water at this time of year. But to begin with, if we do fish out long, we'll fish a nice rig on the bottom like we are here to begin with. And if we do start getting line bites from fish feeding further up in the water, we could try shallow. Lots of little bites there, so I think there are a lot of silverfish in here. So I think I'll stick with the harder baits. But obviously if I wasn't getting nuisance fish like this, or smaller fish, silverfish, then you could fish softer baits like soft pellets, but springtime I look to fish harder baits, hard pellets. Fish are feeding confidently, so I tend not to use expanders at this time of year, just hard pellets, baits like meat, corn, bigger baits. Hopefully they're going to work today. Okay, so we've had a brilliant start on that short line, so I'm going to show you the 2 rigs that I've set up on that short line. I said earlier I've got 11 hollow. It's my good sort of starting point on most commercial fisheries. It's soft enough to catch them little crucians that we caught today, and when we do catch a bigger carp it's perfectly fine, especially with a side puller. You may notice as well I normally leave a little bit hanging out as you do. I've got a little bead there that just sort of keeps it in there, but if I do hook a big carp that sort of runs me ragged and tries to bottom me out, it will slip through and give me that little bit extra cushion just in case if we do hook a bigger fish. So then down to the rig itself, 017 power line is sort of the go-to rig line that I use on most of my carp and F1 rigs throughout the summer, spring. I've got a 4x12 F1 maggot there, nice carbon stem. Now when the conditions are good like this, I do tend to opt for a carbon stem, and a 1.5 tip that's got is sort of my go-to for most sort of F1 fishing and even carp. So they're the floats that I use a hell of a lot throughout my fishing. I mean, if the wind did get up, I'd sort of step up to a wire stem, which is the same version of this float, an F1 maggot, no, F1 pellet, sorry. F1 pellet, it's got a nickel titanium stem on that, and it will give me that little bit more extra stability. But when I'm fishing hard pellets, I do tend to prefer a carbon stem. Baits like maggots too, when you maybe catching on the drop a little bit more, because the float does sort of slowly follow it down a bit more. Whereas with a wire stem, it's sort of more for me, it's more for baits where you're sort of creating a pile of bait and presenting that bait over the top and fishing on the bottom, really in a bolt down rig, baits like soft pellets, maybe corn over the top of sort of micro pellets, just sort of creating an area rather than bait falling through the water like I would do on this rig. So because we're looking to catch the odd fish on the drop as well, all I've got is strung out number 10s throughout the bottom half of the rig, spaced a couple more bit further out, probably 5 inches apart, above a 4-inch hook length, and then I've got 013 to size 18 GPM. The eyed version with a 6mm pellet on a hair, just like that. And that's been really good, to be fair. But the other rig I've had set up is more of a sort of a meaty corn sort of rig. I've got a thicker tip on it because I'm fishing bigger baits like corn. Same rig line as everything as before, but this time I've got a 414 diamond, nice thick tip. If the wind does get up, a diamond shaped float or a round body float does give you a hell of a lot more stability. So on those windy days, floats like this are a godsend really, because when it's towing hard you can hang on to the sort of the rounder body without it riding up and going all over the place. When you've got a round body and it's towing just a bit, you can hang on to it just gently and keep the rig in place, whereas a slim float like that is harder to do when it's windy. So this rig's same as the other one really, but the only difference on the bottom end is I've got just a spade end hook. I've got a 14 XSH hook, just to hook baits like corn that I've got with me today, but it'd be a nice hook to sort of hook on a piece of meat as well. The only other time I might have this rig set up is, say we were fishing on a silty bottom, maybe further out with pellets to begin with, and I was struggling to sort of hit bites and they were stirring the bottom up, fizzing. This is the sort of rig that I'd use over the top, nice thick bristle, and it might be one that I could lay on a bit of line, maybe fish worms on the hook. They're good when it's sort of messy, if you like, and they're stirring the bottom up. Nice big bait, worms over the top, with a nice big float that you can see, nice and visible. So when it does go under, it's a proper bite. And sometimes that rig is sort of the one I go to when it gets a bit messy on the sort of silty bottoms. But they're the 2 rigs that I've got on my short line to begin with. I'm probably going to fish a long line as well today that I'm going to try next. And I've noticed a few fish sort of mooching around the margins as well, so I think we might catch down the edge. So I'll have a little go on the long pole, maybe even shallow as well. And we'll try the margins as well. But that short line was really good to begin with. I caught on hard pellets, 4 mils. I tried a bit of corn, but them crucians seem to like the corn, to be fair. So what I did notice was when I did loose feed a few hard pellets, I noticed a few big F1s come up. So I think that shallow line is going to be pretty good today, especially with the warmer weather we're having. I think a few fish might come up in the water. So let's have a little go on some other lines. Okay, so taking what we've learnt from our short pole line early on, when it was really good on hard pellets, I'm doing exactly the same out there. You can just see a cruising fish there. And we've had a brilliant start again on this line. I've caught some F1s, skimmers, crucians. I'm doing exactly the same as before, just putting in 4 mil pellets, but I'm also pinging a few over the top, just to make a bit of a noise, just so them fish follow it down. Because it's a bit further out into the middle of the lake, I'm expecting a few more sort of carp to show up. And I can actually see a carp sat next to my float, which brings me on to my next sort of ploy, if you like. I'm gagging to fish shallow out there. I've noticed when I've been feeding, there's been sort of odd F1. There's a carp sat next to my float right now that I can see. She's turned away from it. But unfortunately I'm fishing on the bottom at the minute. But I think when we do fish shallow, as you can see the sun's just trying to come out, these fish want to be in shallow water, I think. But starting like this on the bottom, it just gives you a good idea of where the fish are. You're still mooching around on the top out there. And when you do loose feed a few pellets and you are starting to get liners but maybe not catching what you think you should be catching, then it gives you a good idea of when to fish shallow. You can see that fish right next to my float there. So he's coming to that loose feed and he's having a good day feeding on the pellets right next to my float, and I'm fishing on the bottom. But we are still catching lots of fish on the bottom, but I am gagging a fish shallow. One of my favourite tactics this time of year. But before we do that, we're having a nice little session on the bottom. So I've noticed it's quite a soft bottom out there, and you do find on commercials it's important to keep plumbing up, especially when you're on a soft bottom, maybe further out in the lake. Especially when you've caught a few. If you start foul hooking a few fish, just get your plummet out. Maybe you're getting a few funny bites, get your plummet out and you'll be surprised how much deeper the swim can be. Obviously the good thing with hard pellets is you can sort of get it to register on the float, so when it does get a bit deeper, the float will sit a bit lower in the water, and that's time to get the plummet out and sort of go a bit deeper. The other thing you can do, there's another F1 up in the water there, is just move sort of maybe a couple foot off to the side and start again. Gives you a fresh bit of sort of silt to fish over. Fresh bit of ground that's not sort of so messy and fizzing too much. When you get fizz on the bottom, it's not necessarily the fish themselves, there's a small fish there. It's actually the bottom getting disturbed and it's releasing all the gases. So if you are getting a peg that's fizzing a lot, be careful with it and sort of move off to the side now and again if you think it's getting too messy. Or the other thing you can do is sort of change your feeding pattern, maybe fish with a bigger pot and a bigger bait over the top, force the fish to feed on the bottom, and fish a big target bait like worms, maybe corn, maybe even paste. Just gives him that big target bait in amongst all the sort of loose and messy silt that's flying around. And sometimes that's a good way of catching them on sort of softer bottoms, but at the minute I think today we'll have a good session fishing shallow in a minute. But at the minute all I'm doing is feeding nice and accurately through a pot, just sort of focus the fish in one area, and then if I'm not getting a bite straight away I'll loose feed over the top, keep the fish sort of mooching around and coming into the sort of swim. You can see fish in front of me cruising around. This place is full of fish. There's a massive F1 there cruising along. So I think we'll have a good session in a minute fishing shallow. And I reckon we might catch a few fish down the edge later, but in a minute I'm happy catching a few fish on the bottom there. So I've got a nice strung out, fairly light rig, just a 4x12, shot in spread out, so when I do lay it in it falls nice and slow. There's a little bite on the drop there. All I do is lay it off to the side, keep a fairly tight line to the float so it creates a nice slower drop. See the float sort of angled off to the side, and then it cocks. I've got it dotted right down at the minute. I think if there are a lot of fish in my peg and I am struggling to see proper bites, what I do is I trim my shots with sort of number 12 stots, and they're quite easy to take off. So if I take a number 12 stot off, it'll just mean a few more mil of tip is showing. It lets me distinguish between sort of bites and liners. In a minute it's dotted right down, but I think to be fair I could do with taking the number 12 off. And going back to the rigs, obviously this is pretty much the same rig as I've got on the short line, but when you are fishing long like this, and maybe there's a bit of a ripple and you're struggling to see your float, then I will change my float pattern. And a great float for fishing this sort of style method is a carp pellets. It's got a slightly thicker tip, it's got a 2mm bristle. It just means when the light's a bit awkward or you're fishing a bit further away from you, sometimes that's a better float pattern to use, because it's important that you're able to see your float. I'm getting a few bites on the drop there. Obviously it's no good if you're struggling and squinting to see your float all the time. Getting a lot of bites on the drop there. I keep laying my rig in. Like I said, I think we should be shallow fishing really. There's a swirl there. That's why it's important to have sort of an in-between rig rather than just a bolt down rig. With a bolt down rig you're missing out on a lot of fish. A lot of venues I go to, when you're fishing a strung out rig like this with hard pellets, you'll find when you do lay your rig in and you get one on the drop, it's normally the bigger fish that do it. It'll be the big F1s or it'll be the big double figure carp that catches it right on the drop. See that ripple's getting up now? That's a sort of situation where you need a slightly thicker tip, like I said, on a carp pellet float. Fortunately today it's not really that windy, so I think it's going to drop in a minute. Give it a few seconds. There we go, I can see my float really easy now. Just keep loose feeding over the top. Keep lifting my rig out, dropping it back in again. Maybe just sort of 6 inches at a time like that. That's a silverfish, I think, had it on the drop. Now, every now and again, take your rig out completely and let it drop all the way through the water column. And like I said, sometimes you can catch a bigger fish doing that. It's noticeable that my bites have slowed down now I'm talking to you. So all I'm going to do now is put theory into practice, because I've got a feeling that I'm not quite fishing effectively on the bottom. So all I'm going to do is put a plummet on, double check that I'm fishing on the bottom, because that float was sitting a little bit lower in the water. So I've just got a 20 gram plummet on, gently lower it in so I'm not spooking the fish that are there. No, the bottom's okay. So all I'm going to do now is take one of those number 12 stops off, and that'll let me see what's happening a bit easier. Distinguish between a proper bite and a line bite. So taking the number 12 off, and we'll start again, and hopefully be able to see what's going on a bit easier. The same again, 4mm pellets in the pot. Just going to dunk it in the water so it holds in the pot while I'm shipping out. Good little tip. And then by feeding through a cab pot as well as a catapult, you're focusing them in one area while still making a bit of a noise with a catapult. Oh yes. Okay, so I don't know if you noticed there, this fish was really high in the water when I laid the rig in. Great big F1, beautiful fish that one. So I think that's my cue to switch rigs, try up in the water, see if we can catch these crafty F1s. Let's just unhook that one. So it's important to keep the loose feed going in and keep the fish competing. So I've got these 4mm fishery pellets. Just going to keep pinging in half a dozen pellets in now and again. Keep some bait falling through, keep the fish in the peg. And then all I've got here is a nice little shallow rig. Might as well run through the rig now, should we? Yeah. So again, I've got my 11 hollow. You notice to begin with I've got quite a long line between the tip and the float. That sort of keeps the float away from the pole tip, because you can spook a lot of fish with your pole when you're fishing shallow and moving it around a lot. And while I'm talking, I keep loose feeding. And then float wise, all I've got is a 4x10 carp shallow float. Nice visible tip there, nice 2mm bristle, glass stem, so it's nice and stable. At the minute I've got all the shot under the float, and all I've got is a hook length of 0.13 to a 16 GPM hook. I'm just banding a pellet like I was on the bottom. I mean, if it was like a venue that I was catching a lot of F1s, it strikes me as sort of being quite a nice caster venue. So I might, if I was fishing sort of casters, I'd probably have like an F1 shallow rig set up, just sort of a scaled down version of this if you like, and maybe have a bit of shot further down the line. But like I said, there's a few big carp mooching around, so at the minute all I'm going to do is fish with no shot up the line, a 6mm pellet, and if I do start missing bites I can shallow up, or I could change my rig so there's a bit of shot further down the line. Sometimes you find with F1s it's important to fish with some shot towards the hook, just to give you that bit of bite detection, and it just helps you to stop missing bites. So before I'm shipping out completely, I'm going to prime the swim. So I've got my rig set about 15 inches or 18 inches to begin with. 18 inches normally a good starting point. And then if you, like I said, if you are missing bites, you can shallow up or change your rig slightly. So I've got that long line, I'm keeping my pole off to the side, I'm just flicking it downwind into my feed. Oh, bite there straight away. I don't know what that is. So there's a nice plot with that hook bait in amongst my loose feed. And because I was loose feeding, there was something there waiting. Not sure what it is though. Soon find out. Might be a chub, I think it is. Chub, a nice greedy fish. Love to come up and feed shallow. This one's running me ragged. Certainly putting up a scrap. Yeah, it's a nice chub. Look at that, that's a nice surprise. Thrown up a few surprises this fishery. I really enjoy myself here. Greedy little fish. So we're going to go straight back out there. Again, I'm just going to loose feed before I go out there. Keep some fish in the area. Get them confident without a pole over their heads. And then when I do lay the rig in, hopefully, there's another there waiting for me. So made a nice plop there. It's important to keep that hook bait dropping through. So when you have laid it in and you've not had a bite, just keep dropping the rig in. Keep laying it in. Because obviously a hook bait that's just hanging there is not natural to them. They want a bait that hits the water and falls nice and slowly. So I'm just going to keep laying the rig in. Letting it plop on the surface. Hopefully a greedy fish comes up and snatches at it. And keep the loose feed going in. Just keep the rigs going through the water, and you'll find if you're more active, there's a missed bite there, more active you'll get more rewards if you work harder when you're fishing shallow. You can see the old carp moving around in the middle of the lake as well. If one comes close enough with that longer line, you can flick a rig towards it, see where the fish are. But the minute we're feeding one spot, keep laying my rig in over the top. If I see any fish, I can try and catch them. Silverfish there. Maybe hard pellets are the way to go rather than casters and things, but you'd certainly have a nice day catching ropes like this. I think what I'm going to do is shallow up slightly on that, because I've missed a couple bites beforehand. Shallow up about 1.5 inches. So probably about 14 inches deep now. Keep the loose feed going in. Just be nice and active. It's all about experimenting, see what the fish want. So you can alter how many feed pellets you feed. It's all a bit of trial and error, see how they respond. Might have been a bite there straight away. And if I was catching like a lot of fish really regularly, I could shorten that lash down, the distance between the float and the pole, and that'll help me hit more bites. But at the minute, I'm happy to fish a long line and sort of be careful not to spook the fish. You can also try slapping your rig as well, just turning it over. It's a nice way to keep a tight line, especially when the wind gets up like it is now. And there we go. Just a different presentation. Keeping that rig on a tight line. We've hooked what looks like an F1. So again, when we were fishing on the bottom, we were catching lots of crucians and things. But we've gone shallow. We're catching different species altogether. So there's a nice chunky F1 there. So if you were fishing on the bottom, you wouldn't really know that these fish were in your peg. As well as that surprise chub. Nice chunky fish. Keep the loose feed going in, and hopefully we'll get a good run of fish now. Now we've really got them feeding now. I've got a feeling that this is something a bit different. Looks very different, in fact. Look at the colour of that. Look at you. What a beautiful fish. Look at the colour of it. Wow, look at that thing. Look at his fins. He's a beauty. Wow. Okay, so we're now trying down the margins. I've started off with just like a handful of 2 mil fishery pellets with a few corn mixed in with a big pot while I was out fishing shallow. I noticed that the bottom's starting to turn cloudy, a few fish coming in and out. And all I've done to begin with is I've got a medium cab pot on the end of my pole, and I've just filled it with corn, a few 2 mils on the top. Ooh, there's a bite. Not a big fish though. Obviously 2 mil pellets are really attractive to fish, and they get fish rooting around, and the corn's just there to keep the fish on the bottom. And then I've presented a piece of corn over the top, and in a minute I caught a crucian, but there were some bigger fish there. I'm going to keep feeding it with my medium cab pot. Grain of corn in there again. I'm just going to fill it up with a decent amount of corn, a few 2 mil pellets. Don't want to feed too many 2 mils because you can find they're quite light and wafty, and the fish can waft it around quite a lot, whereas the corn's quite heavy. So micros are there just to draw the fish in, so I'm just lowering it in, bit of tap, out it comes, and then lower my hook bait over the top. So I've kept the elastics the same as before. See, I know there's a few bigger carp in here. Actually, there's a massive tail down there now. I can see a big fish down there. But he's still there. Hopefully, he's going to turn around and go towards my hook bait. So like I said, it's important to sort of keep feeding your edges, because at some point during the day, on most commercial fisheries, you will get a visit from these bigger fish. I think he's still down there. Float's moving sideways, so I think there's a few fish down there. Just lift it out again. So I've talked to you about the float choice I've got. I've got a slightly heavier main line, I've got 019 power line. And the float choice, you might notice I've got a really thick tip on it. It's really visual, even when it gets sort of dragged sideways and pulled underwater slightly, I can still see it, really visual. I think it's a 2.5 mil hollow bristle on that. It's called an edge float for obvious reasons. And I've got 4 14s, no, it's 4 12s actually, 4x12. And all I've got is just a bulk above my hook length, just to show up every sort of indication. But it's also worth playing around with your shotting pattern sometimes. Sometimes a sort of strung out pattern like I was fishing on my other lines is sometimes better. Especially when you're loose feeding bigger baits like bigger pellets or corn or whatever. But at the minute we're trying to be nice and positive. Bolt down rig. It's interesting, we fed that bait straight away and there was a big fish there that came straight to it. Now I've got a feeling that there's a few smaller fish moved back in again. So might be that we need to play around with the feeding a little bit. Maybe a bigger pot's sort of the answer to catch the bigger fish. There's definitely a lot of fishing like down there at the minute, but it might be those crucians and smaller fish moving around. But that fish I saw was definitely double figures. It had a massive tail on it. hopefully we catch it soon. Water's not that clear, but I could see it quite clearly. So it's worth thinking about the depths that you think are right during the spring. Oh, that was a bite. Wasn't that carp though. Depths can be quite important early on in the year. They don't always come right into shallow water. Sometimes you've got to fish out in deeper water. The edges here though, because there's another crucian, so the edges here are quite deep, so don't really have a lot of choice, which is why I've opted to fish baits like corn because it's quite heavy. I think baits like maggots and even these micro pellets are going to get wafted around a lot. I'm going to stick with this pot for now because that carp's obviously in the area. In fact, now I'm changing my mind. I'm going to put a bigger pot on. Let's try it. Bigger pot. Be nice and positive. Bigger handful of corn. Some micros as well. Hopefully a bigger volume of bait. Might draw those carp back in and give us a bit more time before the smaller fish come in. So it might even be that we need to be a bit more positive and use my bigger pot. At the minute we'll give this a go. Float's sitting a little bit low. I could do with taking one of my number 12s off, but with my glasses on I can still see everything. Just means that it doesn't, probably looks a bit dotted down on camera. At the minute we'll stick with it. Hopefully that big fish is still around. I've got an ugly cameraman hanging over the edge, so it probably doesn't help. But I think this place is full of fish, so I think we'll still catch a few. It's worth playing around with feeding. Sometimes loose feeding can work, like on my other lines. It might be worth loose feeding a bit of corn over the top just to make a bit of noise. Makes a really loud splash, corn, so if there are fish in the area like that carp, I'd imagine that carp's sort of hanging back a little bit at the minute, but a bit of bait hitting the water can draw him back in again. But feeding through a pot like I'm doing now, I can actually see that carp over there actually, or a carp. Hopefully it'll come a bit closer. But feeding with a pot's nice and accurate, so when a fish does come in, its head's going to be facing towards your hook bait, or my hook bait. And hopefully we nail them. It might be that the fish are responding a bit more to the micro pellets, and might be worth cutting the corn out and using my corn as a sort of a visual hook bait over the top of micro pellets. That might work. So I think I might try that next time if we don't catch one. Just feeding micro pellets and fishing corn over the top. Not sure that's hooked in the mouth. It's not a big fish. I think what I'll do is I'll take another shot off the rig. Yeah, it's foul at that one. So I'm going to take another number 12 off so I can see what's going on a bit easier. Leave a bit more float showing. I want to try and draw these bigger fish back in, so I'm going to cut the corn out, see what happens. Just feed micro pellets. Grain of corn on the hook. Obviously I could try bigger hook baits as well. Double corn could be a brilliant hook bait down the edge. Likewise, 2 big dendrobinas on a big hook can be good. Trying to keep a tight line so when I do get a proper positive pull under, I should connect with it. It's important to distinguish between what's a bite and what's not. So my float's moving sideways and getting small indications there, but I'm waiting for one positive sharp tug and that's your proper bite. There's a big carp there now. Ooh, just touched my line, I think. I think he's still there though. He actually tried to eat my float then, so he's coming off the bottom. So those micro pellets have drawn some better, more fish in. If anything, there's a few too many at the minute. The thing is, on some commercial fisheries like this one, you've only got deep water close to the edge. Ideally, getting this many line bites and fish in the peg, I'd want to try and target shallower water really, but we haven't got that option today. So it's about trying to get the feeding right, either a bigger pot and wait for a few fish to come in might be better than a cab pot, or feeding heavier baits just like corn. I think if it was coming into the end of the day and there were a few more fish being confident, then corn's probably the way to go. But I think because we're still sort of early on in the session, I think the micro pellets are quite important to bring the fish in, but the corn is going to nail them on the bottom and keep them where I want them feeding. Now there's quite a few fish there. I'm going to swap and change it a little bit. I'm going to take another shot off. And I'm going to cut out the micro pellets because the fish are there. And I think a smaller amount of corn. I'm not going to feed any micros this time. I know there's a few fish down there, I'm not sure what they are. But with corn, it's just going to keep them on the bottom. So I think feed nice and accurately. Lower my rig in over the top. They've got a bit more bristle showing this time, so it looks a bit nicer. And we're just waiting for that positive whack under. Hopefully by feeding that heavier corn, it's going to keep the bait on the bottom, keep the fish feeding on the bottom, and hopefully we'll catch a few like that. Okay, so I made a change there, and I put 2 worms on, because there's obviously a lot of fish in a peg. And that brought me a quicker bite that time. Feels like a reasonable fish. A big F1 I think. F1's here, massive, immaculate fish. Ooh, hooks come out. There we go, nice chunky F1 there. Lovely fish to catch. So all I've done there, I've got 2 worms on a nice big hook. Just thread them both through the head, and then fill the pot with a bit of pellet and corn. Then those 2 worms are a nice big visual target bait over the top. If one does come in, then it's certainly going to know that hook bait's there. Hopefully, like that fish has just shown, it's not going to take too long for the next one. So it's all about making a few changes. See, there were that smaller pot, there were a lot of smaller fish coming in, crucians and stuff. Now I've switched to a bigger pot, still feeding a combination of corn and micro pellets, but just changed to a nice bigger bait over the top. It's still early on in the day really to be fishing down the edge, but just goes to show how good this fishery is. We've fed some bait and there's some fish coming in. Few indications there. Float's moving sideways, look. Just got to ignore that and wait for a positive pull under. See the float's been pulled under, dragged to the side, just got to wait for a nice positive pull. The sun's coming out now, I can see carp cruising around everywhere. Hopefully there's a few coming in the edge. There we go, wait for a nice positive tug. Not a massive fish again, but it's charging off. So if this was a match, I'd probably look to fish 2 swims, alternate between the 2, maybe rest one side and switch it up, and maybe use the big pot and leave it alone for a little bit while you fish a different line. It's all about getting their confidence up really, and making sure they're happy to feed close in against the bank. Just taking it easy. You never know what you're going to catch when you're fishing down the edge, especially on a venue you don't know. I've seen some massive fish cruising around, but it's nice to have a few surprises today. We've got chub, goldfish, F1s, carp, crucians. It's been an awesome session really. To finish it off, we caught a few down the edge, which is nice. This one's a carp actually, it's fighting a bit. Yeah. Makes a bit of a change. There we go. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed today's session. I certainly have. It won't be too long before I'm back. Catching a few of these fish. Hope you've picked up a few tips on how to catch carp in the spring on F1s, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Preston YouTube channel for more content. See you next time.